Welcome to the Whose Body Is It podcast. I'm your host, Isabella Malvin. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a birth worker, life coach for sovereign women, hypnotist, and a former liberal feminist turned radical truth teller. On this podcast, I expose the forces at play attempting to control our minds and bodies, such as transgender ideology, porn, prostitution, and so much more. Together, we'll untangle patriarchal lies as you listen to jaw-dropping interviews with women from around the world. Warning, while listening to this podcast, you might find yourself triggered or perhaps notice where you've been biting your tongue on the issues that matter most to you. In my coaching, I help women stop getting triggered by every freaking thing, cultivate resilience, stop unwanted behaviors, and increase self-confidence. You can book your first session at whosebodyisit.com. And I want to just say that it's because of your endless support that I'm able to interview amazing women, get their stories out, and produce regular episodes for all of you. So with that being said, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. And if you're just listening in, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and consider making a financial contribution via the link in the show notes. You can also visit my activist sticker shop. My pro-woman stickers have the power to intercept transhumanist programming. So be sure to take a photo of your stickers out in the wild and tag me on Instagram at Whose Body Is It. Without further ado, let's get into this week's story. In today's episode, expert theater educator Amy Sousa unveils the harrowing psychology behind the gender ideology currently being promoted in schools, on television, and throughout all aspects of culture. With a master's in depth psychology and over 20 years of experience, Amy confidently elucidates the real-world consequences of exposing children to gender ideology, foregoing our fear response system, and what happens when we sacrifice bodily authority in the name of inclusivity. Amy breaks down what a synthetic sex identity is, the harm of exhibitionist kinks and drag, how to navigate grooming happening in schools, the empathy trap, and what women can do about it. We end the episode with Amy sharing an outline of inspiring skill building tools for women. And I also get into some of the parts therapy work that I do with women who are working through all the crazy shit. Let's just maybe start with your background before all the trans stuff came into your world.
I kind of have these like parallel tracks that came together, and one is being a theater educator for over 20 years. So I worked in the New York City public school systems with a couple of different programs. I did a lot of things where I used theater to do conflict resolution and peer mediation and anger management and self-esteem building. I also worked for the Brooklyn Arts Council, doing arts and literacy with theater. And then when I moved to Washington, I was the education director at a small regional theater here. And I did play building. So I had students create characters using their bodies. And then it was an opportunity to use those characters to build plays together. So it was, for them, it was a way to speak their own values in their own voices and really kind of express their own concerns and their own uniqueness. Parallel to that, I also went to grad school in depth psychology. I did my postgraduate work in that as well. Although I wrote a dissertation, I did not end up defending my dissertation, but the dissertation is very much used that theater background because it was really about how the creative imagination is a way to be in our bodies, and it's a way to experientially develop knowledge and to build inner authority. So it's a it's an actual hands-on skill building practice of authority building, because it has these capacities where the knowledge that you find when you're doing it, it's not a fact, it's an experience. So where we have like facts that can supplant other facts, like the earth was flat and everyone knew it. And then the earth was round, and a new fact supplanted that old fact. So in a certain sense, facts are, they're important, of course, but they're a little less stable. But the knowledge that you form through experiential practices is not knowledge that can be taken away from you because you went through it. So your gained knowledge is a way of finding inner authority rather than just having a mental fact at hand.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I love that framing. And so you mentioned you worked with children with anger management. At that point in working in the New York public school system, were you seeing kids that were identifying as trans at that point?
Not yet. No.
Okay.
This when I was in New York, I left New York in 2009. So it was very on the periphery. And I think I had an adult friend who had changed her name. And she wasn't, saying that she was a trans man. She just simply changed her name from a more feminine name to a masculine name. I also met a woman who I think she called herself Zem, and I remember I didn't really have a huge thought process around it, except thinking it was very frustrating to remember
Right.
how to address her. But this really started coming up for me actually in Washington. And I remember noticing it maybe starting around 2015. And my value set with kids was always to express their own uniqueness, so I did a lot of things around trying to really help them play, like I would talk about adornments, like all these things that we put on, they're just adornments, and across culture, across history, time periods, all cultures have had different adornments. So these adornments in themselves are neutral in their value, and it's culture that kind of prescribes stereotypes or sex roles onto the adornment. So I would do a lot like makeup is just face paint, and face paint is just a neutral adornment. Clothing is just fabric, and fabric is neutral in its, it's just a neutral adornment. So I always thought I did a lot to help my students express in ways that they wanted to explore or felt comfortable. But I remember there was a kid who was a boy, and he was wanting to go on wrong sex hormones. And there was a group of parents that were supporting him in this, and actually helping get a GoFundMe going to fund this kid. And I wasn't, outspoken about this at the time, but I just was having little conversations in the background. And I was working on a show that had, it doesn't matter, but I was talking to this woman who was a sound director. I was just saying, like, I just had this little conversation like, well, gosh, I feel for this kid, but, if it was my kid, I might let him choose a new name, but I wouldn't want him to hurt his body. And already I just saw it as something that was hurting his body. And I was like, I would want my kid to love their body, and the woman, again, there's no, I don't think either of us had heard of, turf, or, transphobe wasn't a word yet. Like none of that was like in my registry yet. But at the time she was like, well, you can't know what he's feeling. And I kind of was like, but he can, even at the time I was like, but he can only feel his own body. Like that's the one he
Yeah.
has. But it wasn't until post Me Too that I really started getting really active on this, because Me Too came up. And that was, I was really very moved by that. I ended up sharing my own rape story. It was a story that I hadn't told a lot of people. I hadn't told my family. And so seeing all these women come forward and kind of like claim territory and really share what had been done to them, I was very inspired. Anyway, I put my own story out. I don't remember if it was that women's march or the next one, but it was like when there was all the pussy hats and Trump was in office. And I remember I was on the Facebook page for the Seattle Women's March, and there was a group of men who, of course, were calling themselves women, who were saying that the pussy hats were transphobic. And I was like, surely not.
I forgot about this. Yes, because it had the word pussy in it, and men don't have pussies. Oh God.
And I was just like, surely not. Like I just remember arguing with them, but I was like sort of guileless. I just was like, and I was just trying to be really reasonable still at the time. I was like, but God. It's a women's march. Like, what is the better place to talk about women's bodies and women's reproductive organs and women's reproductive health? Like, this isn't phobic of anyone or anything. It's just a woman's vagina at a woman's march. Like, it's a pussy, and then they kind of all piled on the thread, on the Facebook post group, and then they doxed me.
Oh my gosh.
So I started getting Facebook messages like, is this you? Is this where you live? Is this your phone number? We know who you are.
Oh my God, Amy, I had no idea.
So it was scary, but the funny thing is they had my dad's, like, I don't know, they've only, I didn't respond to them, of course. So there's actually a number of Amy Sousas. It's actually kind of a common name. And they had my dad's business information. And I was like, ooh, I hope they call my dad. Like, like he will get him.
He'll defend you. He'll get him.
But it was shocking. I mean, I was definitely scared, and I was really shocked more than anything, like the lengths that they were going. I mean, I was just like, women have vaginas, women have pussies, women have vulvas, women women can talk about their bodies, and it doesn't hurt anyone. Like, what? And again, it was like so freshly post Me Too. I just was incredulous. And I, in a way, like, they can thank themselves for every single thing that I've done since then, because that is the hook that it took to get me to go down the rabbit hole. And then I started researching everything. That's when I found, Magdalene Burns. I found Sheila Jeffrey's book. I found Megan Murphy. I started going down. I moved. I got anonymous on Twitter. Like I at first I didn't have my name associated with my known heretic handle, but it was ultimately, that was the rabbit hole that I started going down, and I started being very active on my Twitter. And then I think it was I don't know, maybe it was like 6 months before the pandemic, I had started using my name and picture. I was like, screw this. And then right when the pandemic started, I like came out in my town. I live in quite a small town. There's only like 9,000 people
Oh,
here.
wow.
And I was sort of like a well-beloved figure, as I had worked at the theater and I had worked with kids and I did things for the film festival here, and like I was kind of a known quantity, and I very quickly went from like a favorable known quantity to kind of more of a pariah. That was big. That was really big. It was really big to like, that was the moment when, and I think some of us who have been in this have had this, that was the moment where, there were people that I hadn't been sharing these ideas with, and that I just ultimately spilled everything. And I used exactly, like the arguments of my kind of my background, like talking about like phenomenologically, like we're always in our bodies, like whatever a man feels or doesn't feel, he's always feeling the physical sensations of his male body. He will never not
Yeah.
feel the physical sensations of his male body, and he can never access physical sensations for apparatus that he simply doesn't have. So there's and to me, again, like, because I was like grounded in that kind of work, I was just like, how are people having a disconnect? Like, this notion is stereotypes, like what? But yeah, that was when I lost a lot of friends. And then shortly after that, is when, I found Karadansky and met a group of women and met you and put on a protest against Biden's EO. And that was the start of some serious activism.
Often I hear like it's literally just not possible. Like men cannot become women, women cannot become men. But I really appreciate the way that you've defined that. Like, why? Well, because every feeling that we have is relevant to our bodies, and since our bodies are just our bodies, and that's just the way that they are and the way that they've been since we incarnated into a body, or was born into a body, or were grown by our mothers, it's just the way that it is. So regardless of adornment, silicone parts, fluctuations in hormonal levels, removal of body parts, it's all still comes back to like you in that very same body. And I like the way that you've kind of broken it down to like the physical sensation. So like when we think about men who are trying to simulate periods, that is the sensation of a fluid coming out of a hole in their male body. Now, there are lots of scenarios where fluids come out of holes of our bodies that aren't periods. It's just so ridiculous. It's like, okay. So now you're saying, if we would just like break it down to facts, you have a man who has a fluid that appears to be the color red coming out of a hole in his body. Okay, they have a story that that's a period, but if you just break it down to the very facts,
they have no access to understand what the convulsions of a uterus and cervix feel like. They don't. Right. They have no access to that understanding of sensation. And in fact, the other way that I like to frame it is that everything that man is feeling is a uniquely male experience. Inverting your penis and creating an artificial hole in your body, that's uniquely male.
Yes.
That's something only a male can do. I have no access to understand what that might be like.
Right.
That's uniquely male. And I think that, to me, it was like always so simple. Like when we're talking about bodies, we're talking about physical form and function, and it's neutral. Like, just like I told those kids, the adornments are neutral. Like, in a way, our bodies are neutral. Like, it's culture that is, projecting a lot of narrow prescriptions onto our bodies, but our bodies they are neutral, they simply have form and function, like we're mammals and not reptiles, or we're animals and not fungus. We're, humans and not primates. So it's just a way of talking about our form and function. And yeah, the body is always perceiving. The body is never not feeling sensations. We are constantly in a perceptual sensate conversation with our bodies. It's constant. And I think part of this ideology, which is so disembodied, and it is, very postmodern, but it's sort of this idea that, like the mind, or I don't know, the gender soul or whatever, is somehow separated, like dissociated from the body, where in fact we are ultimately, a gestalt. We are all at once. We are holistic. We are fully embodied, fully sexed, always. Like no matter what a man does, he's always going to be on a parallel track. Whatever extreme plastic surgery he gets, he will never get closer. He'll always be equal distance from being a woman as he was on the day that he was born.
Yes.
And the other thing that I like to say about this is first of all, because of course, like any of us who have been in this conversation, like there's always like, what is a woman? What is a woman? We get this question all the time. And the thing about our embodiment too is that because it's constant, it's a process. It's a developmental process that starts at birth and it ends in death. I have not even experienced yet all of the experiences that there are. I have yet to do perimenopause. I have yet to do menopause. I have yet to do postmenopause. So I have not even yet experienced all of the things that there are to experience about being a woman. It's a lifelong physical developmental process. That's the other thing that kind of kills me about it. It's not reducible to a concept. It's not a conceptual thing. It's an experience. It's a process over time.
Right. And the TRAs will latch on. They'll say, well, this woman didn't have a baby. Does that not make her a woman? Or this woman had a hysterectomy. Is she not a woman? Or this woman had her breast removed. Or this woman, died at 16. Was she not a woman? And it's like, what?
I know. Well, and they always use women's pain against us. Like, if you cannot conceive, if you are a woman who wants to conceive and you cannot conceive, that is a uniquely female pain.
Yes.
If you have a hysterectomy, that is uniquely female. If you are a girl who doesn't, I had a friend who did not get her period. Do you know how many doctor's appointments she was forced to go to because she still hadn't got her period at 17? The ways that she was poked and prodded and looked at because she didn't get her period. I mean, if a boy is 17 and doesn't have his period, that is a healthy boy. No one does anything.
Right.
So to not get your period or to have a hysterectomy or to not be able to get pregnant, you will go through a lot if as a woman when you're experiencing those things, because it's uniquely female. Men who don't, who can't conceive, that's a healthy man. He's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with him. It's not the same. These things, they keep trying to make it like, oh, now we're the same. No, we're still very different. You still don't get it.
It's so ridiculous. I'm glad we can laugh about it now. I really appreciate what you said about that at all times men and women are on parallel paths with equal distance apart from one another, right? Yeah. The man's path will never intersect with the woman's path. The woman's path will never intersect intersect with the male's path, regardless of cosmetic surgery, hormones, feelings, circles, acceptance, exclusion, whatever. Like it will never be the same. One of my lines. Well, I almost put this on a sticker and then I did it, but which was
you can still do it.
I can still do it. It was you were born a man and you'll die a man. It's just the truth. And I wish that more people and parents and counselors were, said such a strong, honest thing to these poor people who are just seeking and seeking and seeking and seeking to no end.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I know that people are, they're trying to be so nice. I know this. And Jennifer Thomas, who I don't know if you know, she calls it the empathy trap. That they fall into this empathy trap where they are trying to be nice, but again, like, all of these things, the notion of inclusivity or being nice to someone for the sake of their feelings and pretending they're the wrong sex, that comes at the direct expense of boundaries. And it comes at the direct expense of being able to be grounded in reality and to have sovereignty and authority over the reality around me. So this is important for all of us, but it really is important for kids because, this stuff is in the schools. And right now, kids are ultimately being told that they do not have the authority to directly name what their eyes and ears are seeing, and developmentally, to point at a thing and say the thing that's a 2-year-old developmental stage. That's what 2-year-olds do. We, point and say. I point at a thing, I say the thing that I see, and anyone who's, been around a 2-year-old, you do a lot of that with them. Like they're like tree and you're like, yeah, that's right. It's a tree. And, or they're like, like man, yeah, that's right. It's a man. Baby. Yeah, that's right. It's a baby. And also developmentally, like that's why we see like the terrible twos, because it's the very beginning of them claiming authority over the world around them, and they are flexing their will. So it's developmentally appropriate to their age range, but ultimately this is something that all kids need. They need to be able to claim the authority of their own senses, what their eyes see, what their ears hear, and their likes and their dislikes around it. And so when adults, these teachers, when a kid says, "You're a girl," and the teacher says, "No, I'm a they," or "I'm a he." That what that teacher is really saying is you cannot trust your own sense of reality. You cannot trust the information that your body is telling you. You do not have the authority to name and describe the world around you. So it causes a cognitive dissonance and it causes a dissociation, but it also really is a safeguarding failure, because being able to name the world around you, that is a very basic, authority tool. Yes. It's a very, very basic boundary tool, and that helps kids keep themselves safe, and that's why stories like Little Red Riding Hood exist, because she is naming her reality regardless of the external adornments that wolf has put on,
wow,
despite the fact that he has put on, grandma's cap and gown. She's like, but you have very big ears and you have very big eyes and you have very big teeth. And that is the process of naming what she sees in front of her. And it's establishing an authority over the situation.
Right.
psychologically
Right.
and just literally.
And the children who dissent, who are in tune with their boundaries, who can discern, who are fearless about discerning, what is what, get punished. There is
Yes.
now a whole reward system around denying reality, and the opposite. So if you dissent,
Yeah.
you are punished, you
Yeah.
are, put in timeout or detention, or, get a talking to, or, called transphobic and ostracized. So yeah, it really is a kind of flip on the kind of mainstream narrative around uh trans identified students being bullied, being kind of like pushed to the fringes. No, actually, the opposite is happening, where they are uplifted, they are given awards, and the kids who don't want to go along with the delusion are actually become the minority. Now, this isn't in every single school, but public schools, independent private schools, maybe the exception, and maybe you can speak more on this, would be religious schools, maybe religious schools in rural areas. But from the women that I hear from, and I'm sure you hear from as well, it's really everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's a kid to do? I mean, what's a kid to do in a private school where they're being told, you can't say that little boy is a
This
boy.
is this is where they really need their parents backing, because there are kids who do not have their parents backing. And I know moms whose kids have gotten in trouble for not using the wrong sex pronouns. And there are moms that I know who have written letters directly back to the school and said, my kid will not participate.
Mm.
My kid will say that kid's name. My kid, maybe, they agree, like, my kid won't, misgender, even though that's accurately sexing, of course. But my kid will just simply not participate. Like, and I think kids need parents do that. I don't know if you saw this week, there were 3 boys in Michigan who were suspended for
Yes.
accurately sexing another student. And now they are possibly going to be sued using Title IX. I mean, when was the last time that Title IX was used to help a girl who was molested or raped or sexually harassed at school? I mean, when was the last case we used Title IX to do that? Even like in Loudoun County, like girls who got raped in Loudoun County, it's like we have gone so far off of out of the, I mean, it makes me a little insane, but I feel for these kids because they're going to get sued for saying true things that their eyes can see and their ears can hear.
And for anyone who isn't familiar with Title IX and how it's changing, maybe we'll give just like a brief overview. The purpose of Title IX was to protect mostly women, on the basis of their sex, from workplace harassment, from all sorts of things that we've been dealing with and are still dealing with. But now sex is, the Biden administration is pushing for sex to also include gender identity, which nullifies the idea or the facts of sex, the reality of sex. So you cannot protect both the feelings in the head, which are, which is called gender identity, with a material reality. They're completely incompatible. So that's what we're seeing happening in real time. I mean, this is like a prime example of changing this protection to defend trans ideology and therefore penalize 3 boys who accurately sexed one of their peers.
I mean, it's insane. This is very, people keep saying it's very 1984. It's very 1984. that when the government is basically saying you can't say the truth, you're just simply not allowed, and you will be punished for it. It's and I do worry for kids, and because again, like if I'm a young girl and I'm in a bathroom, let's say, and a man comes in, it should be my instinct to be able to scream, call for help, fight back, tell him he has to leave. If there's a man who comes into my space, one, he already violated a boundary. So I don't know what other boundaries he wants to violate. So I should be able to rely on my instincts. And there's a great book about this called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker, which talks about, ultimately having a fear response is a gift because it gives you all of this information, and it's a natural response system to a dangerous situation. And our senses, our sense perceptions and our instincts are all guidance systems to keep us safe, and animals don't have the cognitive dissonance thing. If a rabbit sees a fox, the rabbit runs. The rabbit doesn't sit around and try to mentally analyze, like, well,
is this fox phobic?
Yeah, is this really a fox? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'll try to see what he says, and I'll try to get the idea, and ultimately this ideology causes a cognitive dissonance, and it causes us to go to a place where now we're forced to be in a mental place of mentally analyzing. Now I'm like, well, I don't know. He's wearing a dress, but is he a nice man in a dress? Is he a man who wants to hurt me wearing a dress? Like but the thing is, that's that empathy trap. It's not my responsibility to do any mental analysis. It's my responsibility to respond to my instincts. So these things dissociate us, and especially specifically kids, it dissociates us from our instincts and our ability to be able to respond to them. And I think that is really, it's very dangerous, and it's not, that's why I do always tell people, like, the pronoun thing is not benign. It's not just like benign. It's not like, oh, if they're a nice person, then I use their wrong sex pronouns. No, It is not nice. And when anyone ever asks me to be nice, I tell them that I am being nice to children. That's who I'm being nice to. I'm being nice to children by affirming the reality that we can all see with our eyes and ears. That's nice.
Yeah. You mentioned adornment earlier, and the process of, using the kind of play of adornment and your theater background and working with children in theater. Has that shifted do you see, do you feel like it's more of a blurry line now with all of the, opposite sex appropriation, as Jennifer Billick calls it, like these men who are appropriating our stereotypically female garb? Yeah. Is there a line for you? Like, is drag a line for you? Is that okay? Where do you stand there?
Yeah, drag is definitely a line that crosses the line. I love Jennifer Billick. I love her. Yeah. Synthetic sex identity, as she's talked about recently. Drag absolutely crosses a line. And I think what I think crosses a line is, when you have gone to lengths to make an attempt to fool my senses. So if you are trying to somehow fool my senses, if you are somehow trying to trick me into thinking you are something other than you are, that crosses a line. Like simple non-conformance,
Right.
I don't care. I don't care if a woman, cuts her hair short and wants to wear blue jeans. But if she has gone to the length of taking wrong sex hormones so that she can grow a beard and have her voice drop, yeah, I don't like that, or again, like if a man is wearing prosthetic breasts and has used like pounds of makeup to recontour his face, in a way that disguises him as what he is. Yeah, I don't appreciate it. And I anything that involves all of these extreme plastic surgeries and drag is included in this, even though sometimes they just wear prosthetics. This really comes from the extreme plastic surgery movement really is rooted in porn. That's when we saw women start to have hyper exaggerated breast augmentations and rib removals and lip injections and butt implants. This comes from a hyper objectified, hyper sexualized male gaze, like a demand of men to fetishize women's sexual parts. So I really see all of the extreme plastic surgery that comes around the synthetic sex identities as really being a part of that. It's a hyper sexualization, it's a hyper objectification, and it's also a commodification, that somehow, again, that somehow we're not holistic beings. We are just a collection of parts, that are interchangeable. And the other thing that I see that I don't like, especially with the men who do it, I do think that the women who go into this do tend to dress just like, regular men, like they're wearing clothes that they could wear, regardless of, if they were a woman or who was pretending to be a man or not. But I do see a lot of men who are doing this are wearing fetish gear in public.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
And it's not just like what I'm wearing. It's not just like, a blouse that maybe has some more gathering and a sweater and having long hair. It's like a bustier in public and a teeny tiny skirt and like, it's fetish gear.
Yeah.
I was a part of a conversation on a Facebook group there was a guy who said, well, I'm not pretending to be, he was like, I'm not pretending to be a woman. I just like to dress like this. And it was like, he was dressed as like something my 5-year-old niece would wear, like this little pink halter top and knee highs and a little pink skirt. And I was like, that is no. And there were some women in there, even, feminists who were like, well, he's just non-conforming. And I was like, that is freaking fetish gear. That's not just non-conforming.
Yes. Thank you.
He's not just.
Yes. No, thank you for making that distinction too. And like, there are a number of sex offender, like these men who dress like, there's that guy in DC, I forgot his name, who would wear the tutu, the little girl's tutu that would fan out. And it was so it would like fan away from his body. And what I later learned, that some of these men who want to be validated in public wearing their fetish gear, wear contraptions that will mask their erections. And I want people to like hear that, like that there isn't like your impulse, like we were talking about, to like something's off, right? Like that is real. That is a real thing. These men have been confirmed to be sex offenders. And like, think about it, like going out in public, showing, like almost revealing your genitalia. Like why would one do that? Why would one do that? It's to fulfill a kind of fetish. It's like they're on a binge for validation. And the autogynephiles that I've heard interviewed who speak very openly about their fetish is like, the more clothes they buy, the more like fetish like they appear, like the the more satisfying the fix is. It's like in a kind of in an addictive capacity. And there was one thing, I wanted to mention, I was in New York recently, Amy, and I don't think it's just that I am more attuned to like seeing what is there, but I saw the most number of women identifying as men with beards, no breasts, and also this is always the case that you're almost always the case that you've just mentioned, the men who are pretending to be women in full fetish gear, like walking around Union Square, like full on stripper heels, and no one is batting an eyelash. Like no one's even looking. Like we're not just talking about like in the West Village, the drag queens like coming off of work, from the night before, early in the morning. Like this is like commuter hours, men in full blown fetish gear. And I really appreciate you making the distinction between nonconformity and the normalization of this pornified, objectifying amalgamation of parts and things that we are supposed to accept as like a unique identity.
Yeah. Your kink is not an identity, and your kink is not appropriate for public. And like you say, it's an exhibitionism fetish. It's forced participation. Now you have forced me against my will to participate in your fetish. And I find it very disturbing. And I find these they're just, I cannot believe they're blowing up, but there are more and more and more of them everywhere I look. These libraries that are participating in these drag queen story hours. And why do you want your kid to be exposed to a sexualized performance? Drag has always been an adult, specifically adult male, sexualized performance. This isn't like a clown. I feel like they're treating it like, it's just like a clown. Like, no, these are
right.
These are a highly sexualized. What if we were doing, like hooker story hour? No one would agree with that, because we understand very much that that's a hypersexualized way of dressing that is not appropriate for kids. I mean, there's not appropriate for kids in many ways, but drag is also not appropriate for kids. And I am very concerned by this sort of thing, really all of this. And going back also to what we see just in the normal curriculum in the schools, even just having a pronoun conversation with kids is the normalization of child adult sexual conversations.
Yes.
No adult should be telling kids their pronouns, because already that is ultimately a sexualized conversation.
Yes.
That's inappropriate. And, if I don't know what I worry for my nieces and nephews. I don't have my own children, but I worry for what they are confronted with in their schools. And, luckily they have not yet had any teachers who are pushing this on them, but I think it is probably only a matter of time. And I applaud all of the parents who are talking back at school board meetings. And just FYI, to anyone listening, anyone can talk at a school board meeting. I have testified at school board meetings. You do not have to be a parent, and you do not have to have a child at that school to give feedback. You can stay abreast of the ones that are happening in your area. And a lot of them are even online now, because of COVID, which is a whole other thing. But just if you have nervousness, then they are easier to attend online. It's not as confrontational, but you can share your 2 cents about these policies and how wrong they are.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for saying that. It's true. Yeah, that's something I only learned recently with what was going on in Round Rock. Yeah, you bring up such a good point. Like, can anyone imagine there being a female prostitute wearing fishnets, stripper heels, with her legs spread open, reading a book at a story hour. That would be insane. No one would go for that. No one would like think that was okay, yet it's okay if it's a man. What? Oh, also one thing I wanted to mention, you know this, I grew up in New York City, and a friend of mine in high school for her 16th birthday had it at a drag bar. And
What?
yes, so it was like it was actually a really famous one. I think it's now closed. It's called something like the Red Lips or something. Of course,
Mhm.
it's called the
Mhm,
Red Lips.
mhm, mhm.
It was something of that. I can't remember what it was called, but it was this like this kind of landmark in the West Village.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I think there was a mom there, probably her mom, and maybe
Wow.
10 to 15 girls. And I got
Wow.
a lap dance from a grown man in drag.
What? What did you think
That's
at the time?
I I don't think I was the most like willing. I don't think I was the most excited participant. Like it was really
Mhm.
quick, but even if you went there and didn't get a explicit lap dance, there
Oh.
would be like a stroking or a, you know, they flip your hair or something. You know, there would be some kind of attention drawn to your body, your girlhood, especially your adolescent. You know, you're now at 16, you know, it's
It's
insane.
terrifying.
And like
It's terrifying.
I have really good parents. Like my mom was incredibly protective and vigilant
Yeah.
about where I was going, who I was with, and even with that, I mean, this I don't think it crossed her mind. I mean, certainly not enough to not let me go. It's not like I hid it from her, but
Wow.
also they serve food, and it was kind of like a restaurant, and like it's a confusing scenario because you're like watching a performance, but
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
It's just dinner
also
theater.
yeah, it's just dinner theater, but then like with a casual swiping of your like butt. It's what
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
happening? And also,
God.
why were 16-year-old like why are under 18-year-olds allowed there too? Very, very weird. It's like we're not talking
Yeah.
about also a state where like prostitution is legal either. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just crazy. But anyway, I thought about that, but that yeah, I've
Oh
thought
my
about that
God.
scenario a number of times
Oh
since
my
then.
God.
I'm like, what was that?
Yeah, that's really scary. That's you know, we would be fighting that now.
Yes. Yes. Bye, honey. Have fun. What did you learn
Wow.
today? Well,
Yeah. Yeah, I learned how to twerk. I learned how to Yeah, I learned how to give a lap dance.
yeah, no, mom, it was okay because they're drag queens. It was, I'm sorry, he was how old? No, it's okay. He's gay.
Yeah,
It doesn't
I know
matter.
it's okay.
I'm sorry. The facts are it's an adult man touching your body.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very scary. And I know, you know, our mutual friend Kay Yang, the deprogrammer, has done a lot of expose on this and how there's so much grooming in this with kids like Desmond is amazing, and I see that they're doing this all the time now. One of these I saw one that was happening in the UK at some sort of a festival, and there was or maybe I don't know, it doesn't matter, but there was a drag queen story hour and makeup sessions and also performance lessons. And I just very much, you know, question that. Like, what are they going to learn? Like, as you say, like, are they going to learn how to do a lap dance? You know, and you see, you know, that kid like Desmond is amazing, who is learning how to, you know, have adults stuff money in his pants. You know, this is, again, all of these things are just blurring boundaries, breaking down boundaries, degrading boundaries, and adult child sex conversations are not natural. Those should not be happening out in the world. Those are conversations, you know, that should happen between a child and a parent when it is age appropriate. This should not be normalized just amongst the adults in the child's life. Like,
Yeah.
this is insane.
Yeah. I when I think of the performance learning, I think of the learning how to fool the senses. That's what I think of, like just with, like voice training or like
Yeah.
moving or trying to mimic the mannerisms and the body language, of a woman. Like we do share things in common as a sex class. Like we have a different kind of pelvic alignment, and like we
Yeah.
do move differently, and that can be
Yeah.
studied. It can't be recreated, but like that, I imagine there's some of that. I mean, that's what a lot of like drag performance is
Yeah.
is trying to mimic the opposite sex body movements and
Yeah.
language. So yeah, I really appreciate you defining the line, like in regards to drag culture, and just to repeat what you said, the crossing the line for you is when someone starts to make an attempt to fool your senses. And I think that's where a lot of anger, comes out in people who, let's say, maybe don't have the best intentions, who do want to commit acts of violence against trans identified men specifically, those who are kind of tricked within the context of prostitution, right? There is an anger, and I'm not justifying by any means like violence or murder against trans identified men, especially in this context, but there is, and I've seen some stuff written about this, that there is a level of betrayal and trickery that is really dangerous for both parties, right?
Yeah, well, it ultimately constitutes, I mean, even if it's honestly, even if it's someone who's prostituting themselves, it still constitutes rape by deception, because if you are with a person who otherwise wouldn't be consenting, I mean, it's a weird thing, because like, this is a person who is paid for sex. So, I mean, on the one hand, I don't have respect for men who pay for sex.
Right.
But on the other hand, it still constitutes a kind of rape by deception, because you are that is a person who otherwise would not sleep with you.
Yes. Oh, thank you for naming that. Yes. Rape by deception. Yes. And that results in a conflict between two men, right?
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
then a conflict between two men. And we know that men kill each other all the time. So to make this into something like uniquely distinct from like male violence, like it is a very specific context, and it's infuriating to see the headlines of this epidemic of trans identified men being murdered at alarming rates. It's like, no, these are men sometimes killing other men, which happens all the freaking time. It does not compare to violence against women.
No, it's the biggest, I mean, the biggest form of violence is male on male violence.
Yes.
That makes up most of the planetary violence, male on male violence. Now, the opposite is true of sexual violence. Most sexual violence is male on female sexual violence, but just violence, murder and that sort of thing, that is usually male on male. Yes. For the most part.
Ooh. I was so indoctrinated by the Paris is Burning. Did you ever see that documentary about drag culture in the late 80s, early 90s? It was a documentary.
I vaguely remember it. I think I've seen bits of it, but I don't think I've seen the whole thing. But I don't, what you mean? It made you like, be like, oh, drag is cool, or what do you?
Yeah. Like drag is art, drag is cool. And we need to protect these poor drag queens, because one of the, literally, because one of the main drag queens featured was this man named Venus Extravaganza, and he is murdered before they finished making the documentary.
Wow.
But the subtext is what you just said, which is that it was rape by coercion, or coercive, rape with under, he had, successfully fooled one of his sex buyers that he was a woman, until of course it got down to getting naked, and in an act of anger, and I guess feeling betrayed and tricked, the sex buyer murdered him. And it's like a horribly just like tragic just plot line on so many levels. I mean, it's a documentary, but that definitely triggered my empathy.
Yeah. I mean, that's how marketing works. That this is exactly how marketing works, and this is how Noam Chomsky's famous book, manufacturing consent.
Mm,
These are the tools that the media has to get our buy-in and our participation. And these things. I think that another thing that I'll mention, our friend Kay Yang again has done so successfully, is really she explores how big the machine, the propaganda machine, really is, because it's everywhere. It's in television, it's in movies, it's in fashion, it's it's on friggin' cereal boxes, it's in school curriculum. It's everywhere. And I don't know if everyone will know who Bernays is, who is the nephew of Freud. So he used psychological tools to help big tobacco. And they didn't just sell cigarettes in an ad campaign. They sold cigarettes by having them featured in movies, having them featured on television shows, having, that women on the runway walk the runway with cigarettes. Like, again, these are the same tactics. These are the exact same tactics that we're seeing here, that there is a sort of mass marketing campaign that appears invisible, because it just seems like, there's a character in a television show who, claims a trans identity. Okay. And we don't see like, this is a marketing that is happening to you.
Right. Or this is just like a normal cultural shift that we're just going to move through and evolve. This is just a natural part of our evolution. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, like, just to go backwards a little bit, like, no one likes to be tricked. This is a natural response to not want to be tricked. We all are very reactive. If you've ever had, someone do something like steal from you or cheat you or some of these other things, it's a natural response not to want to be tricked. It's very funny to me that people can't understand, why women would be uncomfortable with this. And first of all, like, it is a honed ability of all animals to recognize sex. This is an evolutionary trait for all, literally all animals have a very honed ability to recognize sex. And this is for reasons of procreation. And it's for reasons of self-protection, because in many, if not most, animal species, the male of the species is bigger and more predatory. And, in mammals, often the male of the species will kill the young of other males, in order to further his line. So, in a lot of species, the males are just more threatening. I hopefully, in general, humans don't kill the youngs of competitive males, but again, this is to say that this is an evolutionary honed trait. So it's sex recognition is really important. So not to want to be tricked is important. And especially, again, like going back to our male violence statistics, especially in a culture in which over 99% of the rapists are men, according to the FBI, and over 88% of the victims are women and girls. So it is highly important to be able to recognize sex. Highly urgent. And to deceive me makes me mad. I don't like it.
Yes. And obviously for violence and for the need for protection and for mating and for procreation, and to be able to determine which is the sex that I am interested in. Is it one? Is it both? And if you have the experience with a man and then you are pursued by a woman who is tricking your senses and who you think is a man, but when it gets to being in bed, or there's just something off, like that is because she's not a man. And being able to know that and to just name that. And that's not to say that there aren't people who want to be sexually active with women who are identifying as men or men who are identifying as women. Like I understand that is the case, and that would make them either same-sex attracted or bisexual, right? And so yeah. I also I work with a number of women who have been in relationships with trans identified men and women, and whose senses have been so disrupted in a sexual capacity that they are still trying to figure out what their sexual preference is. Right. And it's this ongoing process. And that I think is because, and my friends who have not had those experiences, whose senses have not been kind of tricked and confused, are not struggling with finding that clarity around their sexual orientation, who are in their 30s and 40s. It's just pretty clear.
Yeah.
So that worries me too. And with that comes sexual coercion and the pushing of boundaries. But I liked it with this person, so shouldn't I? And they look the same, but they're missing a part. But is it really different? Yeah. Yes, it's different.
Yeah, it's really different. It's really different. I mean, I was on a dating website once where I was approached by, a woman who was pretending to be a man. It was, she had a little beard, but it was still, it was very clear to me. And I do think she wasn't actually, in a way she wasn't lying, because I think she did say she was calling herself a trans man.
Yeah.
But I felt for her in the sense of like, for most women, like I am attracted to men, and, the penis part is important.
Yes.
It's just that's important.
Of course.
It's not nothing. It's hilarious. It's hilarious that, those of us who are not into it, like especially lesbians, this mostly happens to lesbians, but they get called genital fetishists, as if having a sexual orientation is the fetish, where, to me, this other thing, this hyper, cosmetic surgery situation, like that's the fetish.
Mm-hmm.
You are the one performing a fetish to have, to be attracted, to be, and not even attracted. It's not like, again, like these aren't like, out of a choice of preferences. Right. I don't have a preference. There's just, one thing that I'm oriented towards, or maybe I guess with a bi person, you are oriented to two, but
for sure.
But even as one bi woman that I met said it like this though, because she was like, even being bi, I don't date people who
or medicalized
trans.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, the thing is, I like hamburgers and I like milkshakes, but I don't like hamburger milkshakes. That was her way of framing it.
Yeah, no, it's true. And bi women do get thrown under the bus a lot for being like, well, aren't you the ones? Shouldn't you be the ones to, have sex with, these individuals? And like, also, we're talking a self-inflicted medicalization. Like, you are now, if you are dating someone who is trans identified, you are choosing to be with someone who is medicalized, who has medicalized their bodies, and that is distinct from like being with someone who's like diabetic, right? I'm not saying you only have to date someone who's like not on medication, but you are choosing, to be with someone who is quite entrenched in big pharma, in surgery, in a lot of maintenance, right? And that's also something to, it's okay for women to not want that in a relationship. It is okay to have all sorts of boundaries, and it's especially okay to have that particular boundary around, not wanting to inject your partner with testosterone every morning. Like, you are allowed
Yeah.
to say that you don't want to do that. And, whether that's ideologically, kind of fueled, or just in terms of, enabling and participating in a self-inflicted kind of medical endeavor.
Well, and I wouldn't want to date anyone who had extreme plastic surgery.
Yeah.
Like, I guess, I know that now they have such a thing as like ab implants, and some men are even doing these, glute implants. I wouldn't want any of that. Like, if
Right.
I met a man and he was like, "Oh, I got these ab implants," I would be very disturbed. I would think, like, you person who, instead of wanting to be in your body, and I wouldn't care one way or the other, like, I guess how much they worked out at the gym per se, but like, if you want that, work out at the gym, but if, otherwise, just be in your body, just let your body be as your body is. I know men who would feel the same, like they wouldn't want to be with someone who had gone and, had, extreme breast augmentation or ribs removed or have lip fillers, because it's just like that. Just, you are telling me that you are not happy with you. That's what you're telling me.
Yeah.
By going through all of these things.
Yeah.
It's actually communicating to me that you're not happy.
Yes. And I think on a subconscious level, it is very fragile to be with a person who is kind of synthetically kept in their body, right? Like,
Yeah.
that what you're getting in that moment is in flux. Actually, there's no permanence to it. There's no security to it. There's no safety to it. Quite the opposite. It's actually a dangerous place to be in one's body. And so that kind of emotional maintenance or exhaustion too, I've heard, from women, and I'm speaking specifically to lesbians, so who were in relationships with women who are identifying as men, that there's a fragility to dating someone who is not themselves, like you said, like not in their bodies, not themselves, and who's like, what they're presenting is, there's no guarantee that that's what you're going to see tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because it requires so many buttons and machinery and hormones and orchestration to keep them looking like what you're seeing that day.
Ultimately, this sort of thing, I mean, obviously this is about embodiment, but this is also about accurately trusting our instincts. So when you are in a created scenario, when you are in one of these synthetic sex scenarios, you are in a place now where you have disrupted an accurate pain pleasure response. Because now binding your breasts or cutting off your breasts, or getting shots, or getting extreme genital mutilation, this is pain. These are painful things. But now you've disrupted a natural, a pain response should tell us to recoil. When we sense pain, we should recoil. That is harm. If I touch a hot pan, my body knows exactly what to do. It knows how to, jump back. But now these things disrupt the ability to have an accurate gauge of pain pleasure response, because now you are associating pain with authenticity. And this is especially damaging for the kids who are led down this path, because that is their natural guidance system, So now it's like, that's why we, when kids were going through that cutting phase, or when girls, experience anorexia, we try to help them, because we can see that they are having a disruption in that pain pleasure response, because it's not natural to cause ourselves pain. That is a dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
Our bodies are not functioning in the right way, and it really worries me, again, like when kids cannot trust their own bodies and trust the responses of their own bodies. It's really just scary. It's really hard.
Yeah. Maybe, we were talking earlier before we recorded the shifting from the head-on fight, specific to your work. We're not suggesting that everyone do this approach necessarily, but, making space for the, what we do want to see, and leaning in towards, embodiment, and honing in on intuition, and teaching this to children, and moving away from the kind of the fighting with, or the kind of a head-on approach, which we so appreciate in our peers. And yeah, maybe would you mind talking a little bit about maybe your evolution in activism?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure I'm still going to do boots on the ground activism. I think it's important to I think it is important to create a public record of our dissent. I think a lot of times we see, like, sometimes, I'm glad Matt Walsh is like making his documentary. I'm glad, he's doing things like that, even, whatever I think about him. But we hear things from him where he's like, where are the women? Where are the feminists? Like, we're totally silenced, man. Like, we don't have your platform, and no one lets us speak. So it's really hard.
Yeah.
But these actions that we participate in, like the one that, we just did with Kay Yang in New York, these are public records of us saying no. And we see what you're doing, and we don't agree, and we are standing up to say something. However, and this is not an either or, it's an and. So for me, what I see as the value sets of the other side, they are the value sets of disembodiment, of dissociation, of cognitive dissonance, of objectification, hypersexualization, compartmentalization. And so for me, I also, as much as I, of course, want to do direct action, where I'm combating it head to head, I also want to continue to approach this at a values level, so that I can value into the world the values that I do want to see. So if I see those as kind of the opposite values, I think that the values that are actually needed in the world are the value sets of embodiment, holism, being fully embodied, being in my instincts, intuition, sense perceptions. I think these are skill building tools for having boundaries. I'm ultimately working on writing as well. So I am doing practical work with women around these things, skill building work. So I'm using some of these tools that I talked about in the beginning, of where I use my theater and my degree in psychology to do skill building work, to help women be in their intuition, be with their instincts, trust their sense perceptions. And these are absolutely skills, these are skills that we can build. And ultimately, these skills will even help us in our activism, because these skills help give us appropriate boundaries. And they actually grow courage, because these are also the skills of internal authority. So these are skill building around internal authority. And I like to use this metaphor that I got from a mentor of mine, and now I use it when I work with women. She talks about the vacant house. So if you see a vacant house, you might see a vacant house that has all kinds of barriers. It might have, a huge barbed wire fence with that tangle of barbed wire at the very top of it. But if you see a house like this, you'll also notice, kids are going to see it. They're still going to, break through. They're going to hold their parties there. They're going to throw bottles through the window. Drug dealers are going to break in. They are going to do their drug deals in there, because everyone can see that the house is vacant. So people will take advantage, and that will happen regardless of how much barbed wire you use. But when you have a house that is fully occupied, the lights are on, the grass is mowed, there's a little birdhouse and a hummingbird feeder, and it's freshly painted. Maybe you just have a little picket fence. Maybe you don't have a fence at all. You don't need a barrier, because being fully occupied is a natural boundary. That's a natural boundary. That's claiming my ground, being fully in myself, being present, being attuned to my own instincts and sense perceptions. So I am working with women on this. I am leading retreats with skill building in these areas, and ultimately, I'm working on writing. I would like to, it's taking some of the work of my dissertation and changing it to be a little more palatable, because that's really technical. It's really it's academic and not as interesting. Right. But I want to really write and communicate this into the world, how to become fully occupied, so that, people can see, the lights are on, someone's home. And again, it's a really easy way to create boundaries. And the thing that I do think is happening for a lot of these kids who are so dissociated, ultimately they're like that vacant house, and again, it doesn't, in a sense, matter how many barriers, it doesn't matter how many barriers you put up, because when people can see that the house is vacant, they're going to take advantage, and I think there's a lot of women who have had this. I know that when I was, I came to some of this work on my own, partially through the event of my trauma, because that put me in a dissociated state. So I have a lot of compassion, for these people who feel dissociated from their bodies. I can understand that. I can understand feeling dissociated. I can understand feeling like my body is not a safe place to be. I have deep understanding of that feeling. So, it's its own kind of body dysphoria, even though I didn't wish I was the opposite sex. I didn't have that kind of, I didn't go in that direction, but I did have this feeling like, this is not a good place to be, and ultimately I, did a ton of processing, but the best processing that I did, was through somatic work, through embodied work. Now ultimately, like this is, where I have honed all of my expertises. I've honed my expertises in theater, which is, putting things through your body, becoming a character in your body, and also the background in psychology that I went through, and also just my own practical self-development work also plays into this. I want us to revalue these things, because one, I think that we are in an imbalance in our culture, and where we've really forgotten these things or undervalued them, and not really seen how urgent and important these things are. I think women need these tools, and men and women need these tools. I just happen to have a heart for working with women. Men and women need these tools, of course. But I think women now more than ever, because we are now in a culture where we see this hyper objectified version of women in porn, in men who LARP as us. And it's ultimately like culturally acceptable. So it's hard not to have that influence your own way of being. And I think, but the more that you can skill build in these areas and learn to trust yourself and your senses and your intuition and your instincts, these create natural boundaries.
No, I love that. There's so many lessons in what you just said. I was thinking, like, I don't get trolls anymore.
Yeah.
Very
right?
rare. Very rarely. Very rarely. They just started to die down.
Yeah.
And I can only explain that as me being like a fully occupied house. The lights are on, and no matter how many times they drive by the house, I'm still there.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so many ways that could be interpreted, like on a personal level too, but I really appreciate that metaphor.
Well, and in a way, I mean, you do some different kind of work, but this is also the work that you do ultimately. Yes. I mean, this is very, you do skill building in this area as well. These are skills that can be developed.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Resilience building, the not getting triggered, like the trigger, like in this case, going back to the house example, it's like the trigger would be someone drives by and the person who lives in the house runs out with a gun, ready to shoot. Like, it's just not necessary. We don't have to act like that at this point, because we are cooking an elaborate recipe. Like, we are so involved in our cooking, in the house, and actually people are at the house. We are entertaining at that point, and we can't even fathom standing on the corner just counting the number of cars that go by. It would be insane. So yes, I totally agree with you, and I love the work that you're doing, and I love the way that you kind of tied it back into your background in theater, and how the somatic element sounds like incredibly crucial. And my version of the theater, the character stuff is the parts therapy. In NLP, it's called parts therapy, or with the conscious leadership tools, it's the persona work. Or so each kind of modality has its own expression of examining those characters within us, those parts of us that are trying to really have a positive intention, but are getting a bit misdirected. And I just spoke with the episode I released recently with Jeanette Cooper, who for Partners for Ethical Care. And she was really she really got into the goals. Like, what are the goals that these children are trying to meet? How can we isolate the positive intention and the goal and meet those needs in a different way? And that's the same thing for compulsive behaviors too. Like, there's always a positive intention, whether it's smoking or binge eating or hair pulling. So how do we create the space for that?
We can really look at this in a sort of holistic, naturopathic way. For example, the symptom is not the problem. The symptom is just a signal pointing to what is the real problem. Just like if you get a fever, your body might be fighting a virus or an infection. The fever is not the real issue. And I think that kids who are experiencing discomfort from the stereotype projections of a very narrow, regressive, sexist culture, ultimately that's an accurate response system. That's an
Yes.
accurate response to those narrow structures. So there is nothing wrong with the body of a child who is having that symptom response. Maybe they are actually more sensitive to the stereotypes than some other kids.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with them, and their symptom is simply telling us, hey, let's address the external environment, because something in the external environment is exacerbating this child's symptoms.
Totally.
And instead what we're doing is just so messed up, because the kid, again, like the kid is accurate, but the kid, instead of going along with the delusion, like going, this is like, I'm sure you've said this before, I've said this before, I've heard others say, but like, it's like if we told an anorexic, yeah, you're fat, and let's put you on a diet, let's get you some gastric bypass, you're right. You
Nuts.
do need to lose 10 pounds, like we
Yeah.
don't affirm that symptom.
Yeah.
We say, hey, you are having a response to some real external pressures that culture is putting on you, but culture is the problem. Your body is not the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how we need to be framing this.
100%. And I really resent the like RODG, the pathology around that. It's like just finding the right psychiatrist to treat your kid. I'm like, no, the last thing they need is more pathology. Like, I mean, I have a lot of judgment. I know parents are
I
doing the
do.
best that they can, but I really, I take issue with, or something that I've been navigating or kind of coming across, is the still amongst that conflict of having a child who's identifying as the opposite sex, still then being entrenched in like Freudian psychology, and isolating
Yeah.
them with like an adult man that they've
Yeah.
never met, who's going to like get them on SSRIs or what, like, there's still so much, but on the other end, I have spoken to a number of parents of trans identified kids who have said that the push for medicalization onto their kids has woken them up to a kind of a larger kind of the pharmaceutical industry, and kind of what's gone on with COVID. And so that's a kind
Yep.
of an interesting silver lining, is kind of
Yeah.
a, because they've been forced to kind of question or, be afraid of the gender affirming therapists and doctors. It has made them skeptical of many other parts of
Yeah.
the dominant paradigm, when it comes to medicine and health and white coat authority and all of that. But I'm
Yeah.
just so glad that you're out there, like giving incredible advice and guidance and support to women. And are you working with children at this point? Do you like counsel children?
No.
Okay, you're with adult women. Okay, same.
Yeah.
I'm not working with children either.
Yeah.
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 Well,
I'm developing an ability to have work like a place to have workshops and retreats.
nice.
So that is being built right now. And what I could see myself doing, is just more of like a camp, like,
Right.
activity setting where, I might have, I've taught kids in the past, and I can see doing some, like some theater camp where,
Yeah.
ultimately, these skills and tools are woven into our
Mm,
play, in that kind of a setting.
right.
But no, I don't want to, I'm not I no, I don't want to get into working with kids
Yeah.
on that level, unfortunately. I
Yeah.
just think it's yeah, I'll leave that to others.
Yeah, for sure.
And as you said, I agree, like I don't want to further pathologize or medicalize or I really, I'm sure same as you, I have a lot of critiques of the APA and their diagnostic manual, the DSM. They're a political organization, and that is a political document. And I don't agree with a lot of the prescriptions in that document.
Oh, I so enjoyed this conversation, Amy. I know we've known each other for like a year and a half, I think
Yeah,
now almost.
yeah,
And
yeah.
this is well overdue. And where can women find you? What is your YouTube handle, your Twitter handle? Tell us where women can find you.
Yay. My YouTube is at Known Heretic. My Twitter is at Known Heretic. My very tiny Instagram is at Known Heretic. And coming soon, I am in development. My website, it's actually up. It's just still under construction. But Little Red Reverberations is the name of that business. I have done a few retreats with a colleague of mine. We did our grad school together. So that has been happening under that name. The work that I am doing individually with women is happening under that name. And I see myself developing, I'm ultimately trying to develop that right now. Oh, and one of the things that I'm going to have coming soon, which I'm going to put this up on my Known Heretic site for, all of the, I have so many followers there. But I'm going to do a really fun Women Who Run with the Wolves class,
Nice.
which people will be able to either do live with me as a back and forth lecture. I will also put it so that people can download and watch it. So that'll be a really fun thing because first of all, I think that book is so cool. But that book in itself is all about intuition building and instincts and and ultimately these kind of tools fall under that feminine heading. I think it's a really nice book because one, it's just a pleasurable read. It's a feminist text that happens to be really interesting. It's kind of mythic and archetypal. So it's, it's not as academic as some of the other texts out there. And I think it also gives a lot of practical tools. So I think it will be a really fun thing to develop.
That's so exciting. I just brought it back from my mom's place. I was like, what books did I leave behind that I want? And I brought that. This is calling too. So that's so as my friend would say, synchronistic that you're doing the class on that. That's awesome. Wow. Cool. Okay. I'll link all of that information in the show notes for women to follow up. Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you again, Amy.
Thank you. Great talking with you.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support my work, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To stay in the loop for my latest coaching programs, hypnosis sessions, free resource guides, and more, follow me on Instagram at whosebodyisit and visit my website, whosebodyisit.com.